On the new podcast, The Turning, Room of Mirrors, we look beneath the delicate veneer of American ballet and the culture formed by its most influential figure, George Balanchine.
He used to say, "What are you looking at, dear? You can't see you, only I can see you."
What you're doing is larger than yourself, almost like a religion.
Like he was a god.
Listen to The Turning, Room of Mirrors on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Bridgewater, the hit fiction podcast, is back. A supernatural thriller presented in immersive 3D binaural audio.
The Bridgewater Triangle.
There is some kind of mystical force in this region that attracts monsters and paranormal activity.
There's something beyond our understanding going on here.
Starring Supernatural's Misha Collins, The Walking Dead's Melissa Ponzio, and Rogue One's Alan Tudyk. Written by Lauren Shippen and created by me, Aaron Mahnke. Listen to Bridgewater on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to 100 Words or Less with Ray Harkins. Hello, 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 podcast people and supporters of independent music, of the punk, hardcore, indie rock, variety, emo, whatever you want to call it, metal. I just keep coming up with random genres. But you are a supporter of the arts, and we appreciate it immensely, including myself, who has been doing this podcast for over 10 years, which is ridiculous to say, but that is a reality. And the reality this week is I have an awesome guest because I love his band. Well, a band he used to play in, technically. His name is Bjorn Dossche, which I am probably completely butchering his last name, so I'm sorry, Bjorn. But he sang for a band called Rise and Fall. He currently plays in a band called Chain Reaction and just recently started a new band because us hardcore kids can never decide to sleep. We always got to make 25,000 bands. But Bjorn is now singing for a band called Wrong Man, which I will toss in the show notes as far as a link where you can access that new music. It's very, very good. But I had this conversation with him because, like I said, I love Rise and Fall. I was obsessed with Rise and Fall. Once they started to actually work with Death Wish, I never even knew that they had a full length prior to that. Not this conversation, but prior to them releasing, that first full length on Death Wish. And then I just became enamored with them. And I saw them a few times when they came over to the States to tour. I had the honor of booking them for 1 year at Sound and Fury. I can't remember. Time falls in on itself. But I chased Bjorn down on social media and was like, dude, do you want to discuss this? Do you want to talk about Rise and Fall? Because I can spend at least 4 hours on it. But that's what we did this week. You love Jeff Rowley and last week's episode. That was quite a popular episode. And I really appreciate him sharing it out to his socials because, people don't need to do that. But he did it, and I appreciate that. You can always email the show, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com. Love to hear feedback and pitches or whatever it is you got in your brain. Always love to have that correspondence. You can also be so kind. This is free. This supports the show in ways that I can't even begin to describe. And that is leave a review on Apple Podcasts, whether it's a star review that takes you 10 seconds, or if you want to write a few sentences and leave a review. I appreciate that. If you're listening on Spotify, leave a star review. Helps out that algorithm. Again, I can't even describe it to you, but I do genuinely appreciate that. And I'm just excited to bring you this discussion, so I will. And here is Bjorn from Rise and Fall, Chain Reaction, and Wrong Man. Record with you saying it and not me butchering your last name. So it's Bjorn. I'm getting that correct, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Bjorn Dossche. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah. You could say Dossche.
Dossche. Okay.
Yeah, Dossche. But
Okay.
you did well.
Good. Yes. My dumb Americanness, I try to not butcher people's names, but I usually do a really bad job at that. It's hard. I first got introduced to you guys via the Into Oblivion record. And I was aware of the band's name, but I just had never listened to you before. And I immediately fell in love with the record because it was this really interesting mixture of, sort of traditional hardcore, but then, had elements of like D-beat mixed with like, Hydra Head Records stuff. Like there was just so much going on. And I realized this may be a big question to start things off, but do you remember when you felt like you started to kind of tap into that sound that you guys were looking for? Because clearly, there's that moment where you feel like, oh, wow, this is like, we're excited to be making this music. This feels a little bit different than all the other stuff we had done with, Hellmouth and everything in regards to, your previous bands and stuff.
Yeah, I think I do remember like a certain phase that we went through. When we did Hellmouth, the first record, I think we kind of rushed it a little bit, and we had a lot of ideas, but didn't always know how to put them into practice, how to make it like actually work and sound cool. And like just around just before we recorded Hellmouth, Cedric joined on guitar, and like pretty much right after that record was recorded, we started writing new songs, and the new songs were like immediately different because they were like a lot more organic. It was actually the four of us at the time, which was Cedric and Vince and myself and our drummer Murph at the time. We were at that moment, we knew that we were getting a lot closer to what we actually wanted to sound like. And like you said, like drawing in influences that we always kind of wanted to incorporate. And now we kind of figure out how to do that. And while we were writing that record, like somewhere like halfway, I would say, we switched drummers, and then JP joined the band. And that also kind of helped us because his drumming is a bit more like frantic and wild, and Murph is more like a groove-based, like a hardcore drummer, which is great. But then a different drummer allows you to do different things as well. And then I think at the time, for the style that we were aiming for, JP really worked out too. So that's kind of when like the pieces of the puzzle kind of fell together while we were actually writing Into Oblivion. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I like how the idea, especially as you start to play in bands, you have all of these bands that you want to, rip off or sound like, but then it isn't until you start to, incorporate these things that may not make sense together is when you start to get these interesting combinations. And I think everybody that, starts a hardcore band always is like, yeah, I want to rip off, Strife and Earth Crisis. And then, you sound like by the first song you write, you sound nothing like them,
Yeah. Yeah.
So we'll pick apart some of the other Rise and Fall stuff as we go through this, but I wanted to focus on you as a person. Were you actually born and raised in Belgium, or where did you come up?
No, I was born and raised in Belgium. I was born in a city called Ghent, which happens to be the most beautiful place in the world. And I grew up there as a small child, and we moved when I was 6. So until I was 6, I moved in Ghent with my parents and my sister, like, was a couple of years younger. And then when my mom was pregnant with my brother, the middle brother, they wanted to move out of the city, which a lot of people were doing at the time, I guess, in the 80s. So we moved a bit further out the countryside, like 20 minutes out of the city. And I grew up in a place called Nazareth, which is like a small, like a boring ass town. And I grew up there, teenage years and everything. But I went to school in different cities around. So I went to school in Ghent as well, and a few other cities because like school was kind of problematic. But yeah, so I grew up in and around Ghent, I would say, and in Belgium. Yeah, for sure.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, the main reason I obviously know about Ghent is the fact that you proudly displayed on the Rise and Fall merch that is very popular. So,
yeah.
I mean, I was aware, obviously, of Belgium in regards to, punk and hardcore, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But just especially when,
random people from the United States can point to really specific scenes where it's like, oh yeah, the, Umeå, Sweden scene, and just like being able to point these small towns that most people in America would be like, what the hell are you talking about? But it's like, oh yeah, Ghent, Belgium, pretty good hardcore scene. It's like, what?
Yeah. It's super funny, right? Yeah.
It totally, in the same way that you can probably point to cities in America and just like have this intimate knowledge, and most people around you are like, Bjorn, why do you care so much about Louisville, Kentucky, or whatever? Like,
yeah, totally true. I know way too much.
Right? Yeah, it's funny. And so, like you mentioned, your upbringing was definitely in, the surrounding Ghent areas, and I've personally never been to Ghent, but I'm going to guess that it's would kind of what most people would maybe think about in regards to Belgium, where yes, it is a large city, but there's a lot of natural elements. It's kind of rural in some parts, where farm life and that sort of stuff. Is that a correct representation, or am I way off?
I'll say that Ghent, like for American standards, it will be a very small city, and for Belgian standards, it's a big city.
Sure.
It has about like 300,000 inhabitants, and it's got like a really nice, well-preserved like historical center. But it also has a lot of like modern architecture, and it's a very like a thriving city. It has a lot of culture, a lot of museums, and universities and schools. So a lot of young people are always drawn to that city, which makes it a very like interesting and lively place, I would say. It's also like a city with a rich history, going back to the Middle Ages and even before that. And at one point I would say like in the Middle Ages, it was one of the biggest cities in Europe at one point at the time, because it was located near a big river, like a place where two rivers came together, and like the whole city grew around that point. It makes sense in a European context. And it's a really, really cool place. But like I said, like for Americans, it's like a tiny pocket-sized city. But like that said, like everyone I've shown Ghent to, everyone loves it. So that's cool.
Right. Yeah. And I really do like when people feel attached to their hometown that they were, raised in, and are able to talk about why they like it so much, rather than most people that, especially when you have that, punk and hardcore upbringing, you want to get out of your city immediately, tour the world and do whatever. And everyone just ends up coming back to their city and being like, actually, it wasn't that bad. Like, it was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And so I've just in, sort of knowing you from a distance, as far as many mutual friends and everything, you seem like a pretty, I guess, friendly and outgoing person. What kind of kid did you find yourself being as you started to, develop your own identity, whether you were into sports, music, art? Like, what were you getting attracted to as a kid?
A bit of everything, actually. I wasn't too outgoing as a kid, I would say, but I loved sports for sure. I started playing soccer at a young age, and I would always ask my parents to do more sports. Like, I wanted to play tennis, I wanted to play basketball or whatever, but they were like, "No, one sport's good enough for you." So I really enjoyed that as a kid, and I got into music at a very young age too. And like a little bit, I would say, through my parents, even though they're not like music freaks at all. But I just remember my father like being a huge Beatles fan, and like even as a very small child, I just remember hearing the Beatles a lot around the house, and like a lot of like 60s and 70s hits, which he was into. And when I got a bit older, one of my cousins like gave me a couple of tapes with like the stuff that was like big in the late 80s, I would say, or like late 80s, like rock stuff like AC/DC and Guns N' Roses and stuff like that. And that's how I kind of got in touch with like the harder stuff. And yeah, I always had like a thing with arts as well. I always liked to draw and paint and stuff like that. So I had like a lot of like different interests as a kid, I would say. And despite all of that, I was pretty terrible at school. So I had a hard time like finding my place, I'd say. I had a really rough time like finding my place and finding out like who I was and what I wanted to do. So I don't know how that all ties together, but that's kind of like who I was as a kid.
Right. So it sounds like you were generally supported by your parents to be able to, you know, kind of explore whatever you want, with the exception of only one sport. But there was that idea. There was that idea that you really didn't find your, you know, either solid group of friends or people that understood that you were, you know, maybe not caring about school, but you were passionate about these other things.
Yeah. I definitely had friends, but then like I had my soccer friends, and then had a few friends from around the block, you know, that I play with. But I don't know why I wasn't that weird, I think, but I just always felt like the odd one out. And I think it really it's a cliche, but I really like kind of found my place when I discovered like hardcore and punk rock music. And I was like, oh, wait, is this me? It's me.
Right. Right. I see all these people in this room. And I think you did describe the feeling of, you know, being a kid really well, where you had these different groups of friends, partially because of you weren't in control of your own social calendar or destiny. It was always up to the parents to be able to, oh yeah, I got to take you over to this friend's house. And yes, of course you could like ride a bike over there or whatever, but you had to separate these groups of friends. And then it was always weird when they met each other at birthday parties, and it was like, oh yeah, these are my sports friends. Like, you don't even know these other people. And it isn't until you find these people where you can like share all parts of you together is when you start to feel, you know, more at home.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. And it's also an age thing, of course, because you kind of like, as you get a little bit older, like I think step by step, you get a little bit closer to who you are, I guess. And you kind of build up your like own little world and your identity. And then that's why the teenage years are so weird, because you're like discovering everything around that time. And you're like, oh, what the hell is all of this? You know, trying to make sense of it all. And that's when you also realize that like some things aren't just meant for you. Because I love soccer. I always loved playing soccer, but like the social component of the whole thing never really appealed to me. And when I got older, around like 16, 17, 18, I was already going to shows a lot. And I felt so alienated from the rest of the team, because obviously I was the only one into all of that stuff. And they were like into like, you know, just going to parties and drinking and that's what people do at that age. But I was like already like occupied with like, shit, the show tonight, I have to get there. It's a couple hours away. I have to get the train. And, you know, like my range of interests was like a lot different than theirs. And somehow like at a certain point I just quit because I didn't really feel at home anymore, you know? So that's kind of how it goes. It's not really like a sad story. That's just how it goes for most people, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And it is kind of heartbreaking when you do have these people that you are so close with. And then, you know, from the circumstances that you're talking about, where it's like, you know, friends getting into partying or whatever. And it's like, oh man, like I'm not interested in that at all, but I still care about you. But like, we can't hang out. Yeah. It's just, but that's
kind of drift apart, you know, that's how it goes.
It's true. And so, like you mentioned, the introduction of music you came from, you know, a lot of the 80s rock and Beatles. And I do like when people have kind of a bedrock of understanding of what music is, as far as, okay, this is what a guitar sounds like, and bass and all that sort of stuff. When did you start to find the more independent minded stuff? Because I know there's clearly a good scene within the Belgian, you know, punk and hardcore stuff. I mean, especially with hardcore in the 90s. So how did that stuff get introduced to you?
Well, I think, to your point, I think I was lucky to be born here in Belgium, you know what I mean? Because not every country in Europe has like the kind of history that we have. And so I was born in 80. So in the mid 90s, like I went to my first hardcore show when I was 15 in 95. And that's exactly when like the scene here in the in the western side of the country was really booming. The 8000 scene that you've definitely heard about, that was really booming at the time. So like I went to my first show in November 95, and my first show was Congress. So they were the band at the time. Before that show, I was only listening to American bands. So my gateway band was Sick of It All. That was a really big one for me. And through them, I discovered like some hardcore adjacent stuff, like stuff like Biohazard, Life of Agony, stuff like that. And then I started digging deeper, found like the Victory style stuff, like Strife, Earth Crisis, Integrity, stuff like that. But it really took me a while to figure out that shit happened in Belgium as well. I had no idea for a long time until like an older friend of mine said, like, listen, like there's this band called Congress around here, and they're playing like all over, and we should go see them. And then they played a town close to ours, and we went together. And he was a couple of years older than me, so he took me there. And that was when I realized that it was actually like a living and breathing thing, like right where I lived almost. So that was like a shocking discovery for me.
Sure.
And it was so cool, like it's funny because like this is a question that I get asked like once in a while, like your first show, and I always love talking about it because it was such a life-changing experience. Like that whole, I can remember every detail of that night because it is so impressive, and like the energy in that room was incredible. Like I had no idea what was gonna happen, and then when Congress started playing, the whole place just like erupted, and I was like, what the hell is this? Like it was so exciting, and like it was scary, but it was wild, and it was positive, and it was everything, and that's when that's when I knew. I was like, oh, this is my shit, this is my thing. So it was a big day for me.
Listen, I'm going to give you a few orders. Go to rockabilly.com. 1, use the promo code 100 words or less. 2, 3, enjoy the merchandise that you purchase from them. 4, no, there is no 4, but rockabilly.com. They have so much merch that you don't even know where to begin. But you actually do know where to begin because you go to the website and they have all of these amazing little sections that you can poke around in, whether it's like, I'm looking for a tank top to kind of ride out these last few days of summer. Or if you're looking for, I really want a Slipknot long sleeve. They got that for you. Or how about a Motley Crue tie-dye t-shirt? All of those things are absolutely real and absolutely exist on rockabilly.com. I love what they do. They make sure the bands get paid with officially licensed merch. They have over 500,000 items, ships quick from the Midwest in the United States of America, and they just support this podcast endlessly. And I really, really do genuinely appreciate that. So I want to give you 10% off of your order. Use that promo code 100 words or less. They know that the show sent you, and it is just a mutually beneficial relationship we can all exist in. So order some merch at rockabilly.com. Thank you very much.
Attention Bachelor Nation. He's back. The man who hosted some of America's most dramatic TV moments returns with a brand new tell-all podcast. The most dramatic podcast ever with Chris Harrison.
It's going to be difficult at times. It'll be funny. We'll push the envelope. But I promise you this, we have a lot to talk about.
For 2 decades, Chris Harrison saw it all. And now he's sharing the things he can't unsee.
I'm looking forward to getting this off my shoulders and repairing this, moving forward, and letting everybody hear from me.
What does Chris Harrison have to say now? You're going to want to find out.
I have not spoken publicly for 2 years about this, and I have a lot of thoughts. I think about this every day. Truly, every day of my life, I think about this and what I want to say.
Listen to the most dramatic podcast ever with Chris Harrison on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I suffer from moderate to severe boredom, but now I'm listening to #Storytime.
My sister started screaming. It was like the November Rain video. My son was like, what happened? People grabbing things.
#Storytime is a podcast where cool people share entertaining, relatable stories from their lives.
Even though, like, me playing the Ouija board was like 4 or 5 years ago now, like, creepy stuff still happens.
3 out of 4 people achieved a significant boost in amusement after just 1 dose of #Storytime.
Every night, we are make-believing being street urchins, and then in reality, walking out to Geary Street in San Francisco and hanging out with the street people.
Hashtag Storytime may cause cringe-related nausea, laughter-induced abdominal pain, and an infection of the perineum. Don't listen to Hashtag Storytime if you're allergic to Hashtag Storytime.
And I was like, well, of course, if this is the capital of hummingbirds, it must also be the capital of hummingbird death.
Keep your brain mildly entertained with Hashtag Storytime. Listen to Hashtag Storytime on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is a parody ad for Hashtag Storytime. None of the claims made in this ad are real or true.
It makes it so much more real when you watch a band that is, from your area. Like, yes, of course, people have those, first show experiences of, touring bands or whatever the case may be. And that's great and awesome. But it isn't until you connect it more locally, or you are just like, wait, like I so distinctly myself, I mean, you and I are the same age. And I remember a big band here from Southern California was Adamantium. And I just remember seeing the singer working at a local grocery store. And it was one of those things where I was like, oh my God, like, I can't believe he's working here. And you just like, you make that little connection. And it's like, oh yeah, like anybody could do this. And so it's like, yeah, why not me? And yeah, I mean, I just love that experience of you listening to all those New York City bands. And then, you have this huge hardcore scene locally, and then you dip into it and you're like, oh, so there's stuff happening here too. Great.
Yeah. It was really wild to discover all of that. And that was just the tip of the iceberg, of course, because there was a lot more going on. So after that show, obviously there were flyers at the show for upcoming shows, and then I bought the Congress record at the show. So it was like going through the thanks list, of course, and discovering all these other bands that were from like the same general area, and that was like right before like the whole thing really exploded over there. So in the years after, like I definitely saw a lot of touring American bands, but the local shows with the local bands were at least as exciting because the scene was so big at the time. So it was a really good, a really good time and place to get into it.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think it's such an interesting experience for, people like yourself that have these, because like you mentioned, these shows that you were, attending from Congress, Lyre, whoever, and, the long running Eberfest, where it's like, these things are huge. Like they weren't, 100, 200 kids. These were like 500 plus people. And then once you started to get into the festivals, thousands of people. And it's just so cool for you to be able to witness something like that at such a large scale and understand that it's like, oh yeah, this can, affect a lot of people pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly. They made such a big impact. And like you said, like local shows with like Congress or Lyre headlining at the time were easily like 300 people, sometimes 400. And they would play almost every weekend, in a small area because Belgium is tiny. So it was quite amazing. Yeah. And it was really inspiring too, to see, because like you said, like these were the people that were also like organizing the shows. They were putting out fanzines. They were just like in the crowd. Like at my second or third show, I already I was on a high basis, like, hi, how are you doing? You know what I mean? So it was really like welcoming as well. It wasn't like this crazy, like snobbish club. It was very welcoming and open, which I really appreciated too, because I was looking for a place and that was my place,
Yeah. I also found it interesting too, just as a bystander watching these scenes pop up around the world. It did for me, and I'm sure in some respects it did for you, once you started to feel the global impact, or it's like you started to, like we were joking earlier about identifying these smaller cities, but then seeing these vibrant scenes and all these different bands coming from it. Did it make you feel the world was, I guess, smaller, or was it just, awesome to be able to listen to all these bands from all over the world?
Yeah, it's cool. It was cool to see that everything was so connected, because I've quickly figured out that like the Belgian scene was like really well connected to, for example, like the Scandinavian scene, because like some of our bands, like Blindfold, for example, they toured with like this Norwegian band called Onward, and you kind of see all like the dots that were connecting. And the same scene was also well connected to like the German scene and the Dutch scene. So it was like you could see that network like that was spreading out like all over Europe, and see these bands tour Europe as well and do really well, and then see the same like type of connections that they would have with US bands that would come over and tour with them. So it definitely made everything seem like, I don't know, like, yeah, like you said, a lot closer and smaller. Like, and it was really cool to notice that like our bands were also like well respected and talked about on a bigger scale.
Yeah. I also noticed that it seems like these scenes worldwide in particular, you know, especially in Europe and Sweden and a lot of the other places that, you know, had these vibrant scenes, that they were connected to, you know, politics, whether it was, you know, veganism and vegetarianism or straight edge or, you know, like politics in general. Was that, I mean, I know that especially straight edge was, I know, popular in your area. Did you notice that being, you know, kind of like not a requirement, but like, did you almost have to like get into it because everybody was, you know, either being straight edge at the time or obviously having a political bent? Did you kind of feel compelled to listen to that stuff because it was so all over the place where you were?
Yeah. I felt compelled to read, I guess, and to figure things out on my own, because there was so much like being put out there. Because it was definitely a time when bands were like very outspoken, and you had like the Krishna bands, like 108 was still like a really big band at the time, and Shelter was big. So that was super interesting and fascinating to see. It didn't mean that, you know, I was going to turn into a Krishna, but I definitely like read about it and kind of dipped into it. And the same thing goes for like the whole communist thing was big at the time, or kind of big at the time in Western Europe as well. Because you had, like, especially in Holland, you had Man Lifting Banner in the early 90s. And then after them, you had like Feeding the Fire. And those were all bands that were like heavy on the socialist communist stuff. So that was intriguing to see like all these different like ideas being presented. And you can just like browse around and kind of check out what these people had to say. And then of course straight edge was one of the biggest like things out there. Like at the time, almost everybody was straight edge over here at shows. And I think the same goes for like the Swedish scene, and to an extent the German scene. But to me, I thought it was such a crazy thing to see that like this like this small scene, this underground scene that we had was like so full of different ideas. And that's one of the things that really made it very different from other music scenes, I think. And to an extent it still does today, you know?
Yeah, totally. And I think it gives you that ability to explore exactly what you're talking about, because you get all of these subcultures and counterculture ideas, honestly, in the same way that, you know, here in America with the 60s and hippies and that thought process of like, yes, you don't need to do all of the quote unquote normal things. There's all these other ideas, and through these bands, you're able to enter a world that you would not have ever gotten exposed to, except like, you know, Hare Krishnas being maybe those strange people at the airports or whatever. Like you would otherwise, you'd have no point. You have no point of reference for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And as you started to go to shows and becoming really engaged with it, how were your, you know, parents and siblings reacting to you probably bringing this weird music home and, you know, you putting X's on your hands or whatever? Like, how were they reacting to you as you were getting into this?
And they were actually surprisingly cool about it, I have to say. Like, they really let me do my thing. And I did go to shows a lot, and like sometimes I'd sleep over and arrive at school late, or sometimes I'd get home super late or bring a friend over that would sleep in my room or stuff like that. And they were always like super chill about that, which is was really nice of them. And I don't know, they probably noticed that it made me happy, you know, and they figured like let him do what he wants to do.
Right. So it's like, all right, Bjorn's not going to get good grades at school. We already know that. But he seems to really like this. So let's let him have fun.
I think that was it. Yeah.
Right. We found something he cares about. Let's let him do it.
Yeah.
And so did you become enamored with the idea of wanting to start a band right away? Or was that something you had to work up to?
Not really. I didn't really picture myself in a band, but I met a bunch of people like my age at shows, and we started hanging out. And like one of those people was Vince, who's still like my best friend today. And Vince was the one that like I got to know him. We started hanging out at shows and sometimes going to shows with each other. He was the one that kind of called me out of the blue. And he's like, "Oh, I'm putting this new band together. You want to sing?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know. Yeah, I guess, I'll give it a shot." And so we formed our first band together, which was a terrible band, of course, but that didn't really matter at the time. We were like having a really good time, and like he figured out how to play bass, and some of our other friends figured out how to play guitar, and the classic story for our first band. And like after that first band, we did another band, and then after that band, we formed Rise and Fall. So that kind of like the whole like Rise and Fall thing grew out of that friendship that we developed in the like late 90s, which is cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm guessing because you obviously the vocalist and you didn't play any instruments, was it almost by default that it was like, "Oh, Bjorn, can you just yell into this microphone? You can probably do that, right?"
Yeah. And once you start doing that, you're like, "Oh, but he's a singer. He can do that." You know what I mean?
Totally.
And yeah, I tried to play bass for a little bit. Like Vince actually tried to show me, but I was hopeless. So I just gave up.
Right. And like you were mentioning earlier, where you didn't really know where you were going as far as like school was concerned, or maybe was there any kind of idea in regards to sort of a career, whether you could follow maybe what your parents did or anything like that, or was it basically like, I don't know?
Yeah, I had no idea. Actually, ended up going to art school. In high school, I'd say I went to art school, started going there when I was, I would say like 15 or 14 maybe. And I liked art, and I kind of liked art school, but then again, I never felt good at school, never felt comfortable at school. And I think it's also like an age thing. I was like a teenager, and like I had like, I don't know, like issues, I guess. And it's just like a rough time for me, and all I knew was that like music like made me happy, going to shows made me happy, and hanging out with my friends made me happy, and school made me miserable. So I quit school when I was 18 or 19 and started working my first job, then without any plan whatsoever.
Got it. Yeah, there was no idea. I mean, especially too with the idea of playing in bands, it wasn't like that was a roadmap on, oh, I'm going to be in a full-time hardcore band like that. That wasn't real. No,
not at all.
And so as you started to get deeper into the scene, and like you said, playing in bands and putting out 7 inches and stuff like that, because the band prior to Rise and Fall was that was The Deal, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And I mean, there was a deal over here in America that's like a Christian punk band, like sort of street punk band. Yeah. Which I'm sure you're aware of now.
Yeah.
What were you kind of trying to sound like as far as The Deal is concerned?
Actually, to get back to that, the Christian band.
Yes, please.
They sent us an email. I remember at the time, it was really cool. They were like, same name, different sounds. It's cool. And that's all the email said. That was nice of them.
Dude, honestly, that's so cool, because you hear the horror stories of, whether it's a American Nightmare or, other bands that had to go through name changes when the other band isn't cool. But I think, specifically in our scene, there's that level of respect where it's like, okay, as long as we're operating on 2 different musical, styles, then I don't think people are ever going to be confused by what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. That was super nice of them, though. But what was the question again about the deal?
No, it's okay. I was just saying, what were you guys sonically going for? What did you try to, sound like?
Yeah. Well, the deal was like a straight edge band, and like in my mind, I was like, yeah, we'll try to draw in some like Judge influences, and we'll try to draw in some Chromex influences. But in actuality, I think we really sounded pretty similar to like the stuff that was big in the early 2000s. So like a bit of like AN, a bit of Carry On, like Riot Brigade was a big one for us as well. In all honesty, that's kind of what we sounded like, but we weren't like that good,
Sure. Right. You were like, we could have opened for a lot of those bands, but people might not have watched us.
Yeah, we did open for AN a couple of times, I remember. So we did play out quite a lot, and we did a bit of touring. So in a way, that band really like definitely allowed us to like put our first steps out there. Like we put out a couple of 7-inch records and like some weekends and a couple of like smaller tours. So that was definitely like an experience that helped later on. Like it was a good like introduction to like or like a little peek into how things could be.
Right. I mean, just like how to put on a show, how to, actually get a song together, and like those things, they sound in retrospect so simple, but like you have to have that practice first before. I mean, very rarely do people, like are in the same band for 25 years or whatever. It's like you got to have all these little different versions, in order to like maybe get to the thing where you're trying to, tour and be more active.
Yeah, exactly.
So with, like you mentioned with you singing for a band, was there I'm guessing that there was a learning curve for you getting up there and, yelling and screaming into a microphone, or was that like immediately comfortable for you? How did you work your way into that?
It was never really comfortable, and like it still really isn't, I still get like nervous when we have to play a show, it sounds strange, but it's how it is. But once you start like playing, of course, like kind of the whole thing like kind of takes over and becomes like it's a different experience at that point. I would say, it's definitely weird. Like the first couple of shows, you're really figuring out like how to actually scream, and like how loud do you want to be, or how intense do you want to be, and stuff like that, without like blowing your voice out. You know what I mean? After like half a song, and because the deal did play out like quite often, that was definitely the band that kind of like taught me how to kind of pace myself and kind of try to control my voice. And then with Rise and Fall, I think I had a bit of experience already, so that helped. But at the same time, like vocally, I was going for a different thing, so it took me a while to settle into that too. So, as you know, because you've been in a bunch of bands too, like it's you take what you've learned, but then you want every band or project to be unique in its own way. So you kind of like want to sound different and give it a different twist. So it's a learning process still, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, especially too. I think the most important thing that you spoke about there was the idea of, pacing yourself, or understanding that I've got 25 shows ahead of me and I'm on show 4. I really have to make sure that show 23 is not us canceling a week worth of shows because I don't have a voice anymore or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's so hard to like not only understand that, but like know your limitations, and then know what's, good or bad for your body, where it's like, yes, I need to, maybe not talk as much after, the show because I need to preserve my voice, and all of those things you don't know until you're actually doing it.
Yeah, true. Yeah. When you start touring for real, that's when you really start like focusing on what you're doing and like being a bit smarter and trying to sleep better and trying to avoid like, like too much like Coca-Cola and stuff like that.
Of course, yeah. Or alternatively, you learn the things where it's like, man, drinking a Dr. Pepper before I play, that actually helps coat my throat. So, that's good.
Yeah. Well, I do remember when we started touring the States that, like, I don't know who it was, but someone like took me to Walgreens, and like they had these like I guess pills that you could take like without prescription, like for your throat, and they were like super, like I don't know what was in them, but they kind of like numb your throat, and which really helps on tour because it's gonna hurt, but then you don't really feel the pain, so you can keep going. I forgot the name of those things, but they were really helpful.
Wow, I don't think I ever took those. I think the only thing I took was they have this throat coat tea that was it tasted awful, but you drank it, and then I can't remember. I'm very much like you. I couldn't remember who told me, but it was another vocalist I was on tour with, and they said that even after you drink the tea, you should suck the tea bag too. And so I always did that, even though it probably didn't do anything, and it tasted horrible. But
sounds like magic.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so with, I'm not going to go through the complete history of Rise and Fall, because obviously you did that with our good friends at the Axe to Grind podcast. But the once you started to, like Marco picking you up from a booking perspective, and once you started to understand that there were some business decisions to be made about the band, was there, were you comfortable with that? I mean, obviously you were, because you made the decisions to, work with people to help you. But how did the business side of things kind of affect you?
Yeah, as a band, like gradually grows, that part becomes more important, and it never was my favorite part. I think for a while, like Vince and myself took care of that, and we we were the ones that were like handling the booking with Marco or on our own, or talking to labels. And then that kind of changed when Into Oblivion came out and things really picked up for us. And then JP was in the band, and JP had some more experience, I guess, in that field. And he was also someone that was more self-assured than we were. So he kind of took over that part of the band while we were like growing and doing a lot more, which was a relief for us at the time as well, because it's such a headache, you know what I mean? Like, and it's not the most fun aspect of being in a band at all. So he was the one that really navigated us through that whole period, like the Into Oblivion and then Our Circle is Vicious era. He was also the one that like established, I would say, like some of the contacts that we had, like with Death Wish, for example, and did a really good job at that, because before he joined, like I said, it was like mostly Vince and myself, and we were kind of going on instinct, you know what I mean, and doing this and that with our friends, and then but once you start like really touring and really playing out a lot, you have to get smarter, and yeah, he was the right person at the right time.
Evilgreed.net is an amazing place where you can find web stores from some of the coolest labels around and bands. They are based out of Berlin, Germany, and a very highly curated roster of record labels and bands that they sell stuff for. But first and foremost, go to evilgreed.net and use the promo code 100words. That gets you 10% off your order. And you can find stuff from record labels like Other People Records, Profound Lore, Closed Casket Activities, Bridge 9 Records, Metal Blade. They have so much cool stuff that they have handpicked because they know that you will like it if you are into a certain style of music. And they also have really, really cool artist stores from Sun, Lingua Ignota, Chelsea Wolfe, Botch, and so much more. So please go to evilgreed.net, check out their offerings, use the promo code 100words, and even though they're based in Germany, they ship to the United States very, very quickly, and I'd love them for that. So go to evilgreed.net and support this awesome company.
Attention Bachelor Nation. He's back. The man who hosted some of America's most dramatic TV moments returns with a brand new tell-all podcast. The most dramatic podcast ever with Chris Harrison.
It's going to be difficult at times. It'll be funny. We'll push the envelope. But I promise you this, we have a lot to talk about.
For 2 decades, Chris Harrison saw it all. And now he's sharing the things he can't unsee.
I'm looking forward to getting this off my shoulders and repairing this, moving forward, and letting everybody hear from me.
What does Chris Harrison have to say now? You're going to want to find out.
I have not spoken publicly for 2 years about this, and I have a lot of thoughts. I think about this every day. Truly, every day of my life, I think about this and what I want to say.
Listen to the most dramatic podcast ever with Chris Harrison on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I think too, because there's, especially within that era of hardcore, the late 90s, early 2000s, there were so many bands that didn't really know what to do with the music business besides the idea like, oh yes, I want to work with a record label. Like you knew that, and you knew the concept of getting shows or tours. But once the idea that there was like actual, when I say money to be made, it's not like you're, going to retire off any of this, but just like, wow, this band sold like $5,000 worth of merch in one show. It's like, oh my gosh, this is like, we got to pay attention to this.
Yeah.
But no one knew really like other people to kind of consult to say like, hey, should we make this decision? Like, is this a good idea or is this a bad idea? You just, like you said, operated off instincts.
Yeah.
And so when there's because you've had experiences both touring the US and obviously, worldwide, there is a distinct difference between touring the US where you're basically left alone and no one really helping you besides, yourself and maybe the people that book the shows. And then, places obviously around Europe from festivals and you feel like you're somewhat being taken care of. How different of an experience was it for you when you started to come over to the States as far as touring is concerned?
Oh, it's definitely very different, but like we weren't new to the game, I'd say. So we knew like when we started going to the States that it was going to be different. And that's also part of the charm, I would say. Like you said, Europe like has such a good like network of clubs and sometimes squats and sometimes youth centers and like a tradition also of really taking care of bands. So like you'll get fed, you'll get a place to sleep almost always. And that's kind of the norm here. We knew that wasn't the case in the States. So you do have a different mindset when you're touring the States. And at the time when we were there, quite often, like when we would get fed or when we would get a place to sleep, we'd be like delighted, we'd be like, whoa, this is crazy. Like,
totally.
We get like, we're getting pizza. Are you kidding me? This is so good. So you adapt to where you are. It's just a very different experience, even though like a show is a show, but the way shows are set up in the States are also different because you really have to like learn to admire like how kids or people promoters in the States book shows because the infrastructure that we have over here isn't available there. So you guys have to find like all these like weird like places that will actually allow shows to happen, like the Elks Lodge or whatever you have. And that's really cool to see as well. In general, I would say the US would definitely benefit from having a network that's a bit more like ours because it's really helpful for bands to like establish themselves and make touring easier. But at the same time, you guys make it happen, and so it's not really that big of a deal, I would say.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is just shocking when you have that experience of what you're talking about, where certain things get taken care of for you that you are not used to, where it's like, what do you mean I have a place to stay when you tour over in Europe? It's like, I was used to just like begging on stage or maybe asking friends of friends to be able to crash at their place. And yeah, I agree that there is that element of you wish that there were some system in place in America besides the informal one that we've set up, where it's like you always have to stay at this person's house when you come through Southern California because, they just have a big house and they can put, 10 people up or whatever.
Yeah. It always worked out, It's a bit more of an adventure. I remember like motels and hotels, or just like random people that we would run into before or after the show, and then it usually turned out just fine. You know what I mean? But another difference, I guess, was also just discovering that like people's knowledge of the world or Europe, for example, it isn't always, up to par. So people would like often just assume that we were American, or if they knew we were European, they would have no idea like what Belgium was at all. And we'd be like, whoa, this is kind of strange, because, for us, like it's a given. We're born there, and we do learn like a lot about like, geography and like how the basic like, map of the world. But you kind of notice that it's not like the same everywhere, I guess.
Oh yeah. I'm sure that you ran into many people who assumed you were, living under a dictatorship, and they had no clue. Yeah.
This is actually I think this is one of Vince's favorite like quotes. Like he was talking to this dude on our first ever US trip, and we were staying at this guy's house, and all of a sudden he asks us, "So, what do you think about freedom?" And we were like, "What do you mean?"
Right. You're like, it's pretty cool. We have the same freedom as you, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was super funny though.
That is really funny. The thing that has also impressed me with what you guys did, especially over here in the States, and I know you guys made an impact worldwide, but you really focused on coming over here as much as possible. And I understand a lot of that was based off of the, the kindness of bands that you played shows with in Europe and you had these relationships with, whether it was Half Heart or Iron Age or what have you. But it seemed like you really tried to make your presence felt here in the States. Was that a decision that you guys really wanted to go for it here in America and, tour as much as possible over here?
Yeah, we really wanted to do that because we had like we had our European label, but we had Death Wish in the States, and I think we wanted to show them as well that we were for real. You know what I mean? Because they'd taken chances on European bands before, and that didn't always work out. Earlier on in the Death Wish catalog, I would say, but we were like, this is our time. Let's do it. Let's really do it. Like the stuff that we did with Rise and Fall is the stuff that we always wanted to do before we got the chance to. And when you have like the connections and you get to know the right people and you get the offers to do those things, we just kind of jumped at them and just did it. Because if you want to be taken seriously, especially on the stage, you just have to be there. You have to be under people's noses. Otherwise, you don't exist. So that was the only way for us to get attention and to get people to listen to us and check us out. Otherwise, you remain like this like little novelty of a European like thing that like 12 people know about. You know what I mean? But when you're actually over there, you exist. You're for real. You can talk to people. You can play your show and convince them, and that's what we try to do.
Yeah, I agree, and I mean, in my head too, I always looked at any band that traveled a long distance, internationally. I felt like there was that element of, this is maybe the only time I'm going to get to see them, because America was going to break this band and they're never going to want to come over here again. So I better catch them the first time they come through. Otherwise they're not coming back here.
Uncle Sam's going to break them.
Exactly. Where it's just like, I just so distinctly remember seeing certain bands coming over from Sweden, whether it was like, Demon System 13 or, even you guys, like, the first couple of times I saw you, where it always felt that time, like this may be the last time I get to see them, because, it's hard. It is extremely difficult to tour in the US if you're a US band. And on top of it, you guys are, coming over internationally, most likely illegally on non-work visas. So there's so many elements of that being even harder.
Yeah, true. It was always a bit of an adventure and a risk as well. Yeah.
Yeah. When did you feel, as you guys were getting out there and playing shows, when did you feel that people were really kind of gravitating towards your art and paying attention to what it was that you were doing? Would you put it kind of in that Into Oblivion time, or was that, maybe like halfway through that record cycle, or where would you kind of point in your own head as people recognizing that you were, a quote unquote real band?
I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. Like, we were lucky enough that even our first East Coast tour that we did, that was already good. Like, in my mind, like the first show was in Brockton near Boston, and Converge played it because I think Jake had the promoter put Converge on the bill to draw more people, so more people would also see us. I think that was the idea at the time. I think so. It was like us and Blacklisted, Converge, Guns Up. I think so. That was a big show, and we were super nervous, but we did really well at that show. So that first show, while we were playing, we were just looking at each other and we were like, "What the fuck?" We're in the States and people are dancing to us. This is insane. You know what I mean? So I think that first show already kind of affirmed that we were appreciated, I guess, to an extent. And obviously not every show was like that, but that was a really good first experience, a good first taste. And then the tours we did after that, especially I would say the tours in 2007, we did the Iron Age tour in the spring and then Have Heart tour in the summer. Those were both for the most part, really good tours as well. And we really felt like it was the right time for us to be there. We didn't feel like outcasts at all. We felt appreciated. We felt like a kinship with the bands that we were touring with, and met so many cool people, a lot of people that I'm still in touch with today. So it kind of clicked straight away, I would say.
Yeah. No, that's really cool that you had that experience of, especially just that appreciation where it's like, not only are you here in the States, but that you're playing in front of people and that some of them are reacting positively to you. That's, a success in and of itself, but that's really cool that you felt that, so closely to the first time of you guys getting over here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I was going to hit on the idea. I mean, I know that you guys toured relentlessly and got to the point where it was basically just, you were not able to exist any longer in that, touring hamster wheel that so many bands kind of feel like they have to be a part of, because like you said, if you're not in front of people, you don't exist. And so, I know that there was a lot of strain on that last, US tour you guys did, and, you guys were arguing, and the band kind of took that pause. For you personally, was it one of those things where it was just the grind of being gone for so long, or was it the fact that I just want to be alone, or was it a combination of all of those things that kind of, led you to the point of being we can't exist like this anymore?
It wasn't those things. Speaking for myself, I didn't mind being away from home. I actually loved it. And I didn't mind the drives or anything like that. It's just a combination of individuals, being in a van together for so long and spending so much time together, and getting up on stage every night, giving it everything you got. And not everyone experiences that in the same way. And I think for some of us, it was maybe frustrating. I don't think everyone was getting out of it what he wanted to get out of it. So that must have played a part. And I think we didn't always have the same expectations or the same the same perception of how things were going. And like in 2007, like we toured so much, we played so many shows. It kind of got to that point that you just described. Like we kind of like got into a big, myself and our drummer at the time got into a big argument. It had to cool down. We finished the tour. We took some time off when we got back, and then we regrouped a couple of months later. So it wasn't such a huge deal. We got over it like quite quickly, but like the personalities didn't change, so that the same type of conflict like resurfaced a couple of years later, when we were like getting very busy again in 2009. Which kind of led to like a lineup change and everything else. But it's a learning process, and it's natural for these things to happen if you're gonna be like seeing each other that much. It's pretty intense, you know what I mean? But honestly, like to me, I never had a problem with like the drives or like the repetition, because like just being out there and being able to do what you love and play shows, it's so gratifying in itself. It's a kind of almost like a once in a lifetime thing. So that wasn't really a problem. It was more like, like I said, like the combination of individuals and like that didn't always work out.
Sure, right. And I mean, that conflict from a person to person level also can easily spill out into the music, where it's like, the reason there's this, this good art that pours out is, it doesn't always have to be based on personal confrontation, but like an element of that can really help, something grow.
Yeah, true. But in our case, that wasn't really the case. I would say, like we kind of struggled when we were writing Our Circle is Vicious, but we did talk about that as well in some other interviews. But then again, like the record turned out just fine. Like it isn't my favorite, but I listened to it again like recently, and it was actually better than I thought it was.
Sure.
Yeah. And then, you change lineups again, and then we got to do like a fourth album, which in itself is kind of crazy for a hardcore band to do 4 albums. And in that way, I don't really have any regrets. Like we got to a point where we actually did everything that we set out to do and more. And that's kind of like the point where you realize that we can keep this going. But can we keep it going in the way that we want to? Because the band like really needs and deserves all of our attention. But we're 10 years older at that point, like when we're doing the fourth album, Faith. So like, can we still like put everything into it? And do we still have the energy to get into touring again and repeat that same cycle, or maybe write another record? And I think we all kind of felt that like it was best to like leave it at that, or at least take a break, which is what we did.
Right. And I like what you said there with a hardcore band getting to 4 records. Like that's a huge achievement, because very few get 2, let alone 3. And then, like you said, having, 4 full lengths, like that's especially all the splits you did and everything else that you put up musically, that's something to be proud of.
Yeah. It's a lot of songs.
It is a lot of songs. A few last things I wanted to hit on was the once you started to break away from touring as much as you did, and yes, you were still active and playing shows, but not in the relentless nature that you guys were from 2003 to 2007, 2008. Did you feel like you had kind of a new perspective on the fact that you could start to build some relationships and stuff at home, or was it difficult to get off the road for yourself?
Yeah, it definitely felt weird for a while. For a long time we were all combining work and touring, and then sometimes we quit our jobs to do more touring and then get kind of back into work. But once touring is out of the picture, you really start focusing on, oh wait, I kind of have to maybe like establish a career.
Right.
So that becomes important, and so the focus kind of changes, and you focus on doing better at work and evolving and growing at work, and you're not away as much, and your world becomes a bit smaller. So that was definitely something that like I had to get used to. Yeah, like how do you find your place in quote unquote like the normal world? Like without becoming like a normie.
Yep. Right. Becoming a civilian, as I like to say. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is going to sound really basic and almost stupid, but where did you learn English?
Well, some of it obviously in school, and then I'd say that again in Belgium we're kind of lucky that everything that we see on TV or hear on the radio, we don't dub anything. So we do have subtitles. So we hear English all the time, which really helps us, I would say. That's one of the biggest differences between like Belgium and let's say Germany or France or Italy. That really helps us because we're exposed to English from a young age, and I can like tell just from like listening to my daughter. She's 8 and she's picking it up at an amazing speed as well, and then it kind of comes naturally,
Yeah. No, it's just I always am impressed because I mean clearly in America like there's no, I mean, yes, there is an effort to learn a different language, but it doesn't, never to the point where you would ever ask somebody to do an interview in Spanish and they would feel comfortable. But, it's just like, it's almost assumed, especially within, music where it's like, oh yes, like, I don't care where you're from. You need to learn how to speak English in order to do interviews. And I'm just always impressed. So anyways, that's a stupid question, but I was just yeah. It's always interesting.
What could help you understand it as well is as you know, like Belgium is such a small country, and like so we speak like the northern part of Belgium. We speak Dutch, so I speak Dutch. That's my native tongue.
Yeah,
and like from a young age at school, even they do tell you like, listen, Dutch is like it's a super nice language, but there's only like maybe like 15 million people in the world that speak Dutch. So if you're only going to speak Dutch, you're not going to get very far. So from a young age, you really like start to understand that if you want to get anywhere and if you want to travel and want to communicate with people like on a bigger scale, you'll need to learn your languages. So we get taught French from a young age, and we get taught English from secondary school. So when you're 12, I guess 12 or 13, it's when you start getting English in school. So that's really like the thing with us in Belgium. Like we know that we're a tiny country. We know that nobody in the world is going to understand our Dutch gibberish. So we really have to
right
make an effort. That's what we do.
Right, you got to make it easier for other people, right?
Yeah.
The fact that you are still active within the hardcore scene, like you said, you didn't want to turn into a normie. You play for a band called Chain Reaction now, and you've still been involved in regards to this scene overall. What keeps you connected to it? Because I know, you and I are the exact same age, and I know how I respond to these questions. Like it's just obviously sort of a part of who we are, and I'm sure many of your peers you've seen, because it takes effort as you get older to still care about this or stay active in it. So yeah, I guess what keeps you connected?
Well, I still think it's a super energizing and inspiring scene. It's a super inspiring like little world of our own, and I really enjoy watching it evolve and change. And this is gonna sound corny maybe, but I love like hanging out with like younger people at shows and like talking to them and like seeing how they perceive things. Like I love discovering like what bands are important to them, what they're into, and like what drives them to do their bands, like what they're inspired by. think it's super, super fascinating. And like when like Rise and Fall kind of like stopped like playing out, it was never my plan to like retire and be like grumpy old dude on the couch, be like, well, in my day, you know what I mean?
Right.
I hate that. I do hate that with a passion. So I always kept going to shows, like, and the same goes for everyone else in Rise and Fall. Actually, we all kept going to shows, like, doing our thing. Like everyone has done a whole bunch of bands after Rise and Fall, and so like we still have that connection between all of us, and we do still have that connection with like the scene today as well. Like, and not in a way that I don't feel like, you know, like, oh, there's the Rise and Fall dude. I don't want to be that guy. I'm just a participant, you know. I want to be a part of things, and I want to like help where I can. I want to go to shows. I feel lucky to still be doing a band, and we get to play like cool shows with cool bands, and we get to connect with people. I still like, you know, like run into people that I've never met before. Like sometimes they're older, sometimes they're younger, but it doesn't matter. Like it's still like a very enriching thing to me. It still makes me happy as well to be part of it. So I guess that kind of answers your question, you know?
Yeah. Oh no, I think it's awesome. And I think that a lot of people feel that connectivity and that energy from the idea that this is a young person's game. Like there is an element of staying involved, but you know, we are going to get that excitement watching people who are younger than us and, you know, doing these really creative things with their bands to be like, okay, cool. Like, that's good. Like, we want to see that, as opposed to, like you said, just being, you know, that old guy from on the porch saying it used to be so cool when bands only did this thing and that's it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's definitely a young person's game. Like, we can't encourage young people enough to like do their own thing. Like, never mind what anyone else like did before or said before. Just do your own thing. But we're there to like to watch it happen and to support like their creativity. At the same time, I have to say, this is something I've kind of witnessed here locally in Belgium. Like the average age has gone up. You know what I mean? Yeah. So because we were like, you and me both, we were teenagers when we got into it, but I don't really see a lot of teenagers at shows. So I see a lot of people in their like mid and late 20s, and a lot of people in their 30s, and a lot of people in their 40s still. Like that, in our generation, a lot of those people stuck around, and I even see people in their 50s that have stuck around, like, you know, that were there before we were. So that's cool to see. I think, I don't know, like, I don't really have like the big explanation for it. Maybe people like kind of like want to like get a taste of everything a little bit when they're a teenager, and then kind of settle into like one thing when they're older, as opposed to us when we, you know, got like super into it at a super young age. And that's not really a bad thing either. But so that kind of helps to not feel as old, I guess.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, and to your point, like because the internet exists and there are all these touch points that people can have with the scene, like, you know, say they move somewhere where shows don't happen anymore, but they're listening to this podcast or, you know, buying stuff from Revelation Records, like they could still be connected. It just looks different than what it did, you know, 10 to 15 years ago for them. And that's still just as important, you know?
Yeah, for real. Yeah.
Yeah. The last thing I want to hit on was the fact that you obviously have built a career for yourself. Like, do you, cause you work in fashion, correct? Or what do you do from that perspective for your job?
Yeah, I do work in fashion. I work for a brand called Eat Dust, which is based in Antwerp, where I live. Where I've lived here for the last 9 years, and it's a really, really cool kind of niche brand that grew out of denim, I would say, and now it's like a whole like collection full of like really cool shit for men and for women. And I run the online store. I do customer service. I do a bit of everything there, and it's cool because everyone, it's a super small brand as well. There's like 6 of us, and almost everyone there is also like super into music. And most of us have some kind of background in hardcore or punk rock or skateboarding or whatever. So there's that common bond that we all share, which is really cool as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that really becomes apparent when you do enter the real world, but then you understand that, especially with the creative arts, so many people have a similar connection to, punk and hardcore or whatever, because they were attracted to it, at an early age.
Yeah. And once you share that, it's it's green lights from there on,
So yeah, it's game over. You're like, oh, so you know about this. Oh, we get to talk for hours about this.
Yeah, exactly. Like, hold on, that range? Let's go.
Exactly. And then you being a father as well, how is the idea? Like, I presume that your daughter has maybe, interacted with your music at some point. Is she like, what is daddy doing yelling into a microphone? How does she react to that?
Yeah, she thinks it's kind of weird, but she's kind of intrigued at the same time. It's funny that you're asking, because actually, how should I put this? Like, I'm not the guy that wants to take his daughter to hardcore shows at all.
Yeah.
I want her to find her own thing, and I do play music around the house or in the car, and I can kind of sense when she's interested or not. And it so happens to be that she really likes hip hop a lot, which is cool. It's fine with me. So I've taken her to a couple of hip hop shows before, which she really enjoyed. But actually, about a week ago or 2 weeks ago, I took her to see Turnstile here in Belgium, which was her first her first glimpse, I guess, into my world. And obviously, the Turnstile show seemed like a perfect occasion to me to show her what was going on, because it's such a positive experience. It's super wild. Like, the band is like amazing, and the crowd goes wild, and it's very welcoming and open, and like, she really loved it, So since that show, we've been listening to Turnstile every day, and we're going again tomorrow. So it's kind of funny, how that goes.
It's so funny, because I think that most parents are feeling that same sort of vibe as well, where it's like you can show, a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old Turnstile, and it's so, and I don't mean this as a sign of disrespect, but it's like, it's so basic and rudimentary that people just vibe, like exactly what you're talking about. They just vibe off the energy, and it's so cool to watch that. And then on top of it, you're layering on all the fact that, people are doing stage dives and singing along and stuff. And you're like, oh, this is a safe entry point for hardcore. Like, you can watch this and find something out of, some value out of this.
Yeah. She was like super into it, like super fascinated. And it's really cool to see. But, obviously, I'm not going to take her to like a beatdown show next week with like hoodlums bashing into people. That's not going to happen. But she can get like this experience, and then I'll take her to other kinds of music as well. Like, I want her to see things like, it's the same to me. It kind of fits in the same. It's what I want to do with her. Like, I love taking her to, like, on day trips. We go hiking, or I can take her to a museum, or we go to the movies, and going to see live music is part of that. I want her to be exposed to different things, and then she can pick and choose and go from there when she gets older.
Yeah, exactly. Expose her to a bunch of things. I promise this is the last random thought, but Rise and Fall obviously was definitely, you were a hardcore band, but clearly you drew metalheads in. Like, there were anybody who liked heavy music could find something of value in Rise and Fall. And I always look at the idea that other bands' paths could have been really interesting if they made this different choice, whether it's working with a different record label or whatever. And so I look at Rise and Fall, and I'm like, I wonder what it could have been like. Not to say that Death Wish didn't serve you guys well, because they did. But like, if you guys worked with a label like Relapse, or if you guys like signed to Century Media or Nuclear Blast or something like that, I mean, I'm sure it's impossible to say, but I'm sure you've kind of thought like, oh, that would be interesting if like we had a different experience with that. Have you ever kind of entertained that thought process?
Yeah, it did. Like, I don't know. Those were options. You know what I mean? When we were an active band, like, and I can't really, because it's been a bit too long to remember the exact details. But I remember like interest from those bigger labels. Century Media, I'm not sure, but like one of maybe Nuclear Blast or one of the bigger metal labels. Like you hear like, oh, like this or that A&R person is coming to this show, and then we did meet a bunch of people as well from bigger labels, but like we kind of steered away from that, honestly. Like it's strange because musically we were trying to do like a lot of things, like make it very interesting, and as we progressed as a band, we drew in more and more like weirder influences and started like really like constructing our own little like universe. But at the core of things, we were still like a hardcore band, very much so in our mentality. And so like, especially at the time when we were touring a lot, like metalcore and pro metalcore was so big. So we got to play with a lot of those bands on festivals and sometimes on smaller tours. And we just knew that wasn't our world at all. It really wasn't our world. So we steered away from that. And even we got offered like bigger packages, like big package stores with like metalcore bands and bands of that ilk, which would have been, I guess, interesting things to do, like to maybe like reach a new audience or to make the band bigger. But we said no because we weren't feeling it.
Not to interrupt your train of thought, and this isn't to badmouth any band that you guys obviously said no to, but I distinctly remember a band like ISIS. They made very deliberate choices on who they toured with, and like, every band under the sun, whether it was like Under Oath or Thrice or whoever, offered them tours, and they were like, nah, it's not really our scene. But so what do you recollect a band that asked you guys, because you guys definitely could have fit in with a bunch of those type of bands
to play in front of crowds,
or even bands
is
like
great.
The Devil Wears Prada or whatever, stuff that's like
but to us it just didn't seem very appealing to be on a big like production on a big metalcore package where you're like one of the 7 bands and you don't really have much of a connection with the other bands, I'd say. And with the whole like pro element, these bands have like like fireworks and huge banners and whatever, and I guess we really didn't want to go that route,
Sure.
So I don't know. Maybe it wasn't the smartest thing to do, but it's kind of what we felt like doing.
Well, I think too, it was also a symptom of the time because, in the mid 2000s is when you really had a lot of that style of music become so big, and they were playing in front of, 1,000+ people a night. And they might have had less of a connective tissue pulled into, the hardcore scene or whatever. They may have just gotten into it via MySpace like 2 years ago, which is fine, but it's just not, like you said, the scene that you were obviously trying to kind of like play to.
Yeah. It's hard though. Like you said, it's like very, very hard to imagine. Like, what if you take option B and not option A? But I think we don't really regret any of that, really.
No, I definitely. It's more of a like I said, a thought exercise, and just like, oh, this would be interesting if this would have happened. It's the sliding doors moment or whatever. So
yeah, true.
Well, Bjorn, thank you so much for hanging out. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed what you've done over the years musically, and I was glad to pick your brain on this stuff. So thank you, man.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Woohoo! Swedish hardcore, right? I at one point in my life, I think it was probably, I don't know, when I was like 17 or something, I had these daydreams that I was able to go over to Sweden and just like hang out and participate in the Umeå hardcore scene. I loved that whole like straight edge as fuck, Desperate Fight Records compilation. Like oh my gosh, I love that. So anyways, I appreciate you, Bjorn, hanging out on the podcast. You didn't need to do it, but you did, and I loved it. So that's awesome. Next week, I have a live episode from Outbreak Fest that I recorded in June of this year, and I've got a two-headed monster for this one. I got Brendan from Incendiary and Jimmy from Higher Power, both incredibly fun conversations in front of a live audience, which always was a little bit intimidating, but we did it and we got through it. So that is what we got next week. And until then, please be safe, everybody.
Hey, Mike. Glad you could join me for some great seafood.
Me too.
Wait, why are you dressed in fishing gear?
You said we were going out to catch great seafood, right?
Yes, to Popeyes. Do you even know how to fish?
No, I thought you did.
Oh, yeah, I can catch pretty good seafood at Popeyes. Let's go.
Let Popeyes do the fishing while you enjoy our delicious signature seafood. Get Popeyes Flounder Fish Sandwich or Shrimp Tackle Box before they're gone. Limited time at participating U.S. restaurants.
On the new podcast, The Turning, Room of Mirrors, we look beneath the delicate veneer of American ballet and the culture formed by its most influential figure, George Balanchine.
He used to say, "What are you looking at, dear? You can't see you, only I can see you."
What you're doing is larger than yourself, almost like a religion.
Like he was a god.
Listen to The Turning, Room of Mirrors on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Bridgewater, the hit fiction podcast, is back. A supernatural thriller presented in immersive 3D binaural audio.
The Bridgewater Triangle.
There is some kind of mystical force in this region that attracts monsters and paranormal activity.
There's something beyond our understanding going on here?
Starring Supernatural's Misha Collins, The Walking Dead's Melissa Ponzio, and Rogue One's Alan Tudyk. Written by Lauren Shippen and created by me, Aaron Mahnke. Listen to Bridgewater on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.